Welcome, everybody. My apologies for the delay in the start time. Has been dealing with technical difficulties today. However, we're ready to rock and roll now. Episode 21 of the Commanders Gridiron Report starts now.
For real, we don't know how to act. I'm pointing out facts. If I point a finger, that's point of attack. Good point, who's next? Flag on the plate, now I'm causing them death. We bet on ourselves, so what you expect? A die-hard fan, never live with regret. Yes, sir. Go to my neck. Burgundy flex. Who wants the smoke? We bringing it home. Be my guest. Look how we step. Who we got next? Step on the right, step on the left. Who do we rep? Commanders. Where my soldiers? Right side. Commanders. Where my soldiers? Left side. Commanders. Where my soldiers? Right in the middle. Commanders. Where my soldiers? High off the way they just sound. They turn up as soon as they feet the ground. I am not playing around. I hit them, I bet that they feeling me now.
Welcome, one and all across the nation and around the world. I welcome you all to episode 21 of the Commanders Gridiron Report. I am your host, Drew Willingham, and we are back to give you an update to discuss what we've missed since the end of February. Got some free agency moves, some losses, some gains in the draft. A lot to cover on this edition of the Commanders Gridiron Report, but first and foremost, thank you all for tuning in. It's been a while since we've been on the airwaves. Shout out to A7BN Sports and Team MBS Media as well for displaying this broadcast right here, right now. Originally set to go at 11:05 a.m. Eastern time this morning, but dealing with technical difficulties, the interwebs, the streams. We'll get into that later, but the important thing is right now the show is back for our one-off April special edition, and then we have probably another episode, another week or two, but today's episode is going to be extended as we've got a lot to cover since the last time. I think it was like February 18th or so. It was right after, probably a week or two after the Super Bowl when we last had the episode of episode 20. So now we're back today on these platforms between Sertoba Media, Team MBS Media, and A7BN Sports. Shout out to those of you out there tuning in through those platforms, whether it's on Twitter, well, formerly known as Twitter, now X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, you name it. Thank you guys out there for tuning in and for showcasing it as well. We got some comments to start it out as well. It looks like Ike's in the house already saying, yo, what in the FOK? What in the fuck is going on? What is taking so long? Well, I just explained it. There's your answer there. Ike, thank you for coming on back. We got Mickey saying, stick it up for me. The comment cop in the comments saying the internet is out at Drew's house. Yes, it was out for a little bit. Now it's back. We're all good. Technical difficulties. There's your answer. We're back. The shenanigans are here already within this. And,
you can't handle the truth.
Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. Acknowledge greatness.
Acknowledge me.
It is what it is. We're just having fun out here in this moment as we're back on the airwaves, just celebrating life. Glad to be here. Glad to be here with you guys. And we got the Commanders Gridiron Report rocking and rolling. And to some of you, it may have been
surprise, motherfucker.
It may have been a total surprise, but we are back, and
You like that? You like that?
Oh, you know you do. Now, let's go ahead and get into some football. Let's take this into the 1st and 10 and discuss moves that were made by the Commanders in the past, 6 weeks since we've been on the airwaves? Let's go ahead and check them on out.
They are the Washington Commanders. New name, new marks, new uniform.
Soldiers, are we ready for Operation Burgundy?
First of all, we got to go back and look at how we got here, right? We got to look. Oh, I even left the comment up there. So at least you already know why we started late. There it is. But when it comes to 1st and 10, first of all, welcome back to you guys. We talked about, the brands associated with them. But when it comes back to where we're at with this Commanders team, we had a team that played like a bunch of dumpster Pelicans last season. Sam Howell was ousted as a scapegoat, I guess you could say, on the offensive side I guess you could say when he was ranked like 20th in the league for dropping back and having the most amount of time before the sack was taking place in regards to the amount of sacks that he was taking. Go look up the stat. It's there. Statman. There it is. Now, when it comes to that, traded the Seahawks. We'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. But all of this is a result of the previous ownership and where we were at, just like the ripple effect of where we were at based on the previous tenure of the leadership within this organization. So I feel like there were some scapegoats that were put out there, and I'm going to just be on the record right now of saying that Sam Howell deserved better. And I'm still a Sam Howell fan, and you can say whatever you want, and we'll get more into that trade here in a little bit. But all I'm going to say now, to those of you out there who were throwing shade, my man, Kyle Nash, being one of them, still love you, my man, and we will be on next week's returning episode of the In or Out Sports Debate next Monday night at 9:05 p.m. Eastern Time for episode 106, as that's coming back from a hiatus too. But we'll talk more about that next week. But I'm going to say this to you, Kyle Nash, right here on my show, the 101 Commanders Show. Sam Howell deserved better. He still has one hell of an arm, and he was slinging that rock around. You got to give him credit. The man was working with Terry McLaurin is definitely a great piece to have, but he wasn't really working with much after that. They got some offensive weapons that if he was there right now, he would have a lot more success. And right now, after what we're going to talk about with the moves they made over the past 6 weeks. So we'll get into more about that next Monday, and I'll get more into the Sam Howell trade. But as far as me and Kyle Nash going back and forth, but today we will review that trade and the other moves made by this team. But with the 1st and 10, just want to acknowledge again, this is the one-off April edition. It's been a while since I've been here. I appreciate those of you who are just now tuning in on the other platforms and watching, whether it's through YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Can't say it enough. And thank you again to Team MBS Media and A7BN Sports, as well as my home, Sertoba Media, for the platforms to broadcast this to you, and for those of you tuning in and listening later in on the audio platforms as well. But right now, in this moment, this Commanders team is definitely a major upgraded team in comparison to what they ended with last season. And when we were last here, it was basically decompressing what we had been through up until that point in February. Now we're in April. And it's like Christmas was last week with the NFL draft. And especially when you think about the 9 picks that the Commanders had in this year's draft. It was a lot of draft picks. They made some moves throughout the draft, moved down, grabbed some other draft picks. I really like the moves that they made overall, and we're going to get into all that here to get some graphics and all that awesome stuff to show you within that stuff here too. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and take this into our next segment. That is the Burgundy Flex Review. And with the Burgundy Flex Review, we're going to get more into a recap of what we just witnessed within the past 6 weeks. So tune in to the Burgundy Flex Review.
Go to my neck, Burgundy Flex. Who wants the smoke? We bringing it home. Be like that.
With this, we're going to look at the Commanders' off-season moves up until, the end of February till about now. More so, we're going to aim more at like March 1st, because that's when all the releases and stuff like that happened. And when they started the releases, they let go of left tackle Charles Leno, tight end Logan Thomas, which, even though he had a roller coaster of a career at times, he still made some key plays at times for this organization that, they really needed the help at, because they didn't really have anything else at tight end during those times he was making those moves. So got to give it to him, and, a shout to him for his tenure here with Washington. Now that it's over, I do appreciate your service when it comes to that, because you were here quite some time. Center Nick Gates, safety Cameron Curl is also gone. Cornerback Kendall Fuller, wide receiver Curtis Samuel. The safety special teams player Jeremy Reeves was released on March 1st, but he re-signed on March 15th, so he was only gone for like 2 weeks. Running back Antonio Gibson, quarterback Jacoby Brissett, both of them going to the Patriots, by the way. Center Tyler Larson, defensive end Casey Toohill, defensive end James Smith-Williams, defensive end F.A. Obata, who re-signed on March 14th. So again, he was someone else who was only gone for about 2 weeks. You got to look at Sadiq Charles, offensive lineman, was also released on March 1st. And the rest of this list all happened on that date. Once the first day of free agency happened, they were eligible to go to other teams and sign contracts. These are all the list of these players. Offensive tackle Cornelius Lucas, who re-signed on March 22nd, so he was only gone an extra week than the other two mentioned players who re-signed. Defensive tackle Abdullah Anderson, linebacker Cody Barton, who went to the Broncos, linebacker Khalik Hudson, linebacker David Mayo, wide receiver Byron Pringle, wide receiver punt return specialist Jamison Crowder, but he re-signed on March 18th, so again, for him, only about 2.5 weeks he was gone before he re-signed. Fullback Alex Arma, safety Terrell Burgess, kicker Joey Sly, which based on his production at certain points in the last season, it was definitely time for him to go. Defensive tackle David Bada, defensive tackle Curtis Brooks, tight end Brandon Dillon, running back Derek Gore, linebacker Jabril Cox, and linebacker Dejon Harris round out all the players that left the team on March 1st when free agency began, as far as when you were eligible to seek other teams out for contracts. And April 15th, they released long snapper Tucker Addington after, a selection in free agency that they made when they signed somebody I'm going to get to here momentarily. But that was a result of that signing right there, which was a really key addition that we'll get to here shortly. But I got graphics and all that for you guys when it comes to that stuff. Also, April 25th, declined the 5th-year option for linebacker Jamin Davis. So declining that 5th-year option, speaks volumes for him and where they saw him, as far as their future with the team. He's not coming back. After 4 previous seasons with the team, Jamin Davis is gone, and that rounds out our releases for the release period of free agency. Now, before we get into our draft picks from last week, we got to talk about who they signed. And we'll go in order of who they signed and when they signed them. Like on March 6th was when they had their first signing of free agency, and that was Zach Ertz right here, tight end, coming over from the Cardinals. Of course, about his days with the Eagles. A little bit past his prime. He was only guaranteed $1.8 million this year, but, at least he does have an opportunity to play his old team 2 times in a year if he can stay healthy and play. And they may not get 1,000 yards out of him, but if they can get about 600 to 700 yards out of him and a few touchdowns, I think that'll be good enough production that it'll be well worth it for that signing right there. Then, of course, we all know, and I told you we were going to get to this, and I brought it up at the beginning of the episode, the Sam Howell trade. Sam Howell was traded on March 14th, as they were seeking options at quarterback, and they definitely did in the draft here and what they did with free agent moves. But you got to look at Sam Howell right here. He was traded on March 14th, and the trade details are as such. They get a 3rd-round pick, the number 78th overall in this year's draft, as well as the 5th-round pick, number 152nd overall. And the Seahawks received 2 draft picks as well, a 4th and a 6th. And Sam Howell, so pretty much, a pick swap, and Seahawks get Sam Howell. He gets an opportunity at a second chance at some point with that team, maybe with the Seahawks, or does well enough in preseason that another team sees his footage and he gets an opportunity to be a backup somewhere with an eventual opportunity to start. That's what I want to see, because I saw enough out of Sam Howell that I believe he can play and be a starter in this league. Still very young, can work with his footwork a little bit more, but it's not going to be in Washington. I just don't want to see it be like an NFC East team. Watch it come back to haunt them that at some point the Daniel Jones era doesn't work out this year. And next year, Sam Howell ends up in New York. Could that be a possibility? Probably not. But hey, what if it did? And they had to play Sam Howell twice a year, that being the Commanders, playing him twice a year in New York because he's not going to Philly. We already know about Jalen Hurts being the future. Then, of course, you got, with the Cowboys, you got Dak. But still, even if the marriage doesn't work out with Dak Prescott, I don't think that Sam Howell ends up in Dallas. I think that the most likely team he would land with and have an opportunity to actually play would be within New York at some point in the next year or two. If anywhere else. There's several other teams in the league. And we got the UFL. You can play in the XFL or the USFL division of the UFL and the CFL. There are still a lot of options if Sam Howell was to continue to play. And I didn't even think of it, which, of course, you should all think of it, the Arena Football League. For those of you local fans out there who, around in the States, have an arena football team because they don't have a professional team, NFL or UFL in the area, but you may have an arena team, some type of independent team. He's got options to play quarterback. He may not make the money he's making right now or the game checks he made last year, but he's going to make some money. He can play quarterback for a while if he wants to. I haven't given up on him yet, even though I've gone on a huge rant about it. I was disappointed when they traded him, but I knew it was coming. The franchise failed him, but at the same time, he got drafted and came into this franchise at a time when there was so much turmoil and change and things going on. The out was going out and the in was coming in, and there was a lot of baggage that had to be cleaned up and figured out before, and they're still not 100% done with all that, in my opinion. They still have some lingering effects around with it still to this day, but it's not as bad as it was 12 months ago, nor 6 weeks ago when we were last here talking about things on this show. So Sam Howell gets a better opportunity, a better start for him. An opportunity where an organization may believe in him more because he's got a different management system over there. And the Commanders, with their new organization, with all the coaching changes we talked about the last time we were here with Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury with the offensive side, they can start with their new selections that they made. And we're going to get into that now with the free agency picks. Now that we talked about our first selection with Zach Ertz, earlier in March, then we had the Sam Howell trade. Now we get into other signings. Anthony Pittman was the next signing. And when they signed him, this is on March 15th, the day after the Sam Howell trade, linebacker Anthony Pittman. After that, you got to look at the next signing that they had. Guard Nick Algoretti coming over from Kansas City. You got Pittman coming over from the Lions. You got Algoretti coming over from the Kansas City Chiefs. So two really good teams here that you have got two really good, decent players coming over that were one of them. Algoretti was definitely expected to go back to the Chiefs. He wasn't expected to go to the Commanders at first, but some situations work out a little bit better. A fresh start, maybe a few more dollars in your pocket, but a chance to show another franchise and the league that you are as good as you were with the team that was stacked. So I kind of like that. It didn't really work out as much for his former assistant coach, Eric Bieniemy, last year, former offensive coordinator over there in Kansas City, now going to Washington last season. Didn't quite work out for him, but it may work out with his former guard and Nick Algoretti. So we got to look at that. Dorrance Armstrong from the Dallas Cowboys, defensive end, comes over same time on that day on March 15th. Then you got to look at safety Jeremy Chin coming over from the Carolina Panthers, another decent signing as well. Frankie Louvu came over from the Panthers, so two Panthers players coming on over. Did the Panthers play like a bunch of dumpster Pelicans last year? Yes, but it's because their offensive side is through a bunch of turmoil, not so much their defense. So when you look at Jeremy Chin, the safety, and the linebacker, Frankie Louvu, I think they were pretty decent signings. I don't think they were the reason that team absolutely sucked last year. Let's just be real. The team didn't suck because of those two players. I think the Commanders got a little bit better, and the Panthers may have gotten a little bit worse when you look at the fact that they don't have those two players anymore. You got Marcus Mariota coming over from the Eagles. You got to look at his time with his previous teams that he had played for, with the Falcons, the Eagles, the Titans, everything that had ensued with his documentary and quarterback. And now looking here, is Marcus Mariota going to be the future? No. Is he going to be the bridge quarterback this year to get us to Jayden Daniels at some point? Yes. Marcus Mariota hopefully will play the entirety of this year. We'll get more into the draft picks later. but just in case they still need to rebuild the offensive line a little bit more, which has definitely needed some help. And within these picks that we're going to talk more about in free agency and in the draft market, it definitely improved. But I think while they're taking their bumps and their licks with all this young talent on the offensive line and the weapons around him, Marcus Mariota needs to start this year. And then we have the transition with Jayden Daniels at some point. I don't think Jayden Daniels needs to be thrown to the wolves quite this early. But when it comes to Marcus Mariota, as far as a bridge quarterback to get us to that, I think it's a lot better than the other quarterback that they signed that we'll get to here momentarily. On that same day, they also signed kicker Brandon McManus, the former Broncos kicker, as well as the former Jaguars kicker as well. You got to look at Tyler. I'm going to call him Tyler Badass. It's an awesome name because it's not spelled quite like it, but Tyler Badass is the name to me, and I'm going to call him that. For the Dallas Cowboys, you got to look at him right here. Another Dallas Cowboy that came over with Dan Quinn, but this time on the offensive side, center is definitely an upgraded position with his selection. So I really like what they did right there. Dante Fowler Jr., defensive end, comes on over, and another Cowboy selection. They picked a lot of Cowboys players in free agency, more than any other team when it comes to teams that they pretty much picked them up from. So got to give it to the Commanders. They saw talent. They brought him on over, and they followed Coach Quinn on over because they believe in him. So we'll have to see if it all pays off with all of these signings from the Cowboys. You look at Bobby Wagner, the next one on this list, a linebacker coming on over. You know, he's definitely had his time in the league primarily with the Seahawks and doing what he did with them, resulting in 2 Super Bowl appearances and 1 championship with the Seahawks. Old Bobby Wagner, his time in the league has definitely been a pretty good one. And you got to look at what he has done for this league. You know, being here since 2012, Super Bowl champion in that tenure. He did go to the LA Rams, but it was not during the year that they won the Super Bowl. So, you know, he did have success, did have decent time with them over there in LA, but he went back to Seattle last year, had a pretty decent year last year. You know, he made the second team All-Pro in his return to the Seahawks. So, with that being said, he also was a tackles leader. So, you know, he definitely comes over with some clout. You know, you can't throw it past him when it comes to Bobby Wagner. I think this was a good pickup for the Commanders, especially a leader at the linebacker position that they have definitely been missing for quite some time. Is he what he used to be when he was originally with the Seahawks when he first started? No. Is he somebody that's worthy of a selection for a 1-year contract? Yes. So give it up to Bobby Wagner and his team, his marketing team, his management team, his personal team for getting the deal done and coming on over to Washington. I like this move. And next, you got to look at Tyler Ott. Tyler Ott is the last person who was signed on this day on March 15th, a long snapper coming over from the Baltimore Ravens. And that is why they released Tyler Addington shortly thereafter, as Tyler Ott was definitely a great piece to the Baltimore Ravens last year and what they were able to accomplish. Was he the main reason why? No. But long snapper is an important position, especially for special teams. So when you think about what they had over there with their kicker situation with Justin Tucker and, you know, how they're well ranked for many years and this guy coming over, I really like the pickup of Tyler Ott right here. The next one we got to talk about is at the running back position that they upgraded to. You know, March 18th, 3 days later after all these first big signings that they had, they brought in Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler coming over from the LA Chargers. And you got to look at what he did in his time over there. He definitely was a vital piece for the Chargers. And, you know, it's unfortunate he didn't get to play under Coach Harbaugh. I think that they would have been able to do some special things had Harbaugh been able to come over there a year or two earlier. But then I don't think he would have ever made it on over to Washington in that case. So everything happens for a reason. But, you know, in his 6 years, you know, over there in LA, he did some pretty remarkable things. You know, my apologies, 7 years. He's got, you know, amassed 4,355 yards, which is pretty decent in that time frame. He did have some injuries that derailed his career a little bit. But when you look at, you know, he did have 915 yards in 2022, 911 in 2021. If we can get the Austin Eckler of 2021 and 2022, I think that they'll be okay. However, he did have a pretty big drop-off last year in 2023 when he had 628 total rushing yards. But he does add, a big part in the receiving game as well. Even those years that he had 911 and 915 yards, not quite at 1,000, he did have in the same year that he had 911, he had, 647 receiving yards on top of it and 8 receiving touchdowns to go with his 12 rushing touchdowns, 20 total touchdowns in 2021. That amount of production would work out great for the Commanders. I mean, it really, really would. Then you look at the following year in 2022, he did have 915 yards, which is his best to date, but 915 yards and 13 touchdowns, along with 722 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns for a total of 18 touchdowns. It's like 38 touchdowns in 2 years. It's a lot of production between rushing and receiving. And if we can get 2 years like that out of Austin Ekeler, if he can stay healthy, and they can rotate in with another selection that I'm about to talk about at the running back free agency that they made, I think this team is going to do really, really well with their upgraded, running backs that they made in this offseason. Got to look at Clelin Ferrell, defensive end that they brought in as well, coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. So, Snowman, if you're watching, I know you're upset. I know you wish that you had Clelin Ferrell because he definitely made noise over there at defensive end, but when you bring in Chase Young and you do the moves that they made over the past offseason, you got to look at the fact that, they didn't believe that he could be the go-to guy over there in San Francisco. Clelin Ferrell may not be the number one defensive end on the Commanders either, but I believe it's an upgrade from those that we lost in the start of free agency because they did let go of a lot of defensive ends between the trades from last year, and then you look at the free agent moves they made in the releases that started on March 1st. So right here, when it comes to Clelin Ferrell, I'm going to say defensive end. I'm going to say it was a good selection from him coming on over from the San Francisco 49ers. Michael Davis, the cornerback from the LA Chargers, another LA Charger that comes on over pre-Jim Harbaugh era, leaving right before it gets started, but coming on over to the Dan Quinn era that's led by his team that he is assembling for his defensive side, is even though he's going to be the head coach, he's still going to be overseeing the defense. So him bringing over Michael Davis was definitely a big, big upgrade over there at cornerback compared to what they had. Now, leading after that, the next day on March 19th, they signed another cornerback. And I'm not even going to try to say his last name. Not even sure how you say it. But what I will say, his name is Noah. Good old Noah comes on over, and I appreciate him because he is another upgrade coming on over from the Miami Dolphins. And if you look at his stat line, it's pretty impressive over there in Miami as well. Michael Dieter, a center, as well as, an ordinary offensive lineman because he's played guard and tackle as well. Primarily a center coming over from the Houston Texans. Comes on over on March 25th. The only person signed on that day, but definitely is going to be somebody who makes an impact as part of the free agents who came along for this team. And, it's definitely a position between that and tackle that this team is definitely need to upgrade at. So right here, between the long snapper Tyler Ott, those two selections, and my man Tyler Badass. I'm going to keep calling him Tyler Badass. That's what I think you should call his name when it's spelled like that. Those three selections, you got 2 centers this offseason in the free agent market. You got a long snapper. So it's not like you have to worry about your center being the long snapper. You got those 2 positions separated. Everything's good. So with that center being taken in Michael Dieter, you can also place him on the tackle side or as well as guard. He's pretty versatile. He doesn't have to play center, but it's going to work out for them because I feel like he may play more tackle than center. But I could be wrong. We could see him starting at center this year. The next move we got to talk about is Jeremy McNichols on April 1st. We're back. We're now in the month of April. We've caught up with that time that we were not on this show from February to now. We're now in April as far as the free agent moves. And Jeremy McNichols was the first free agent move in April on April Fool's Day of all days. They signed him to a 1-year deal. And then you have quarterback Jeff Driscoll. Now, Jeff Driscoll's not going to be the answer. He's not going to be the bridge quarterback. It's going to be Marcus Mariota. Jeff Driscoll is more likely going to be the quarterback 3, playing some garbage time in preseason. May or may not be with the team after preseason. Who knows? Jeff Driscoll is not a long-term, answer, and I mean long-term as far as this year. I'm not even talking long-term beyond 2024. I'm talking like just 2024. And Jeff Driscoll's QB3, maybe even QB4. But the Commanders only drafted one quarterback in this year's draft, so Jeff Driscoll may have a chance of sticking around. They may be making some smart selections over there for the first time in a while when it comes to backups for the depth chart on this team. Sorry, tongue twisted. Only two more selections they had in free agency up to this point that are notable enough for us to talk about. On that same day, a wide receiver, Olamide Zaccheaus, was taken. The former Philadelphia Eagle comes on over April 1st, the final person signed on that day. And the last notable selection that we'll have in free agency that we'll talk about will be Michael Walker. Michael Walker, the linebacker, coming on over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Some moves the Pittsburgh Steelers made this offseason. This one of not re-signing Michael Walker was definitely not surprising. But the selection for the Commanders to take him definitely helps the team out. So I'm going to go with Michael Walker's selection in free agency being an upside for this team. And I think going forward, it's going to be a positive move that this team is going to definitely enjoy reaping the benefits of. Now, we've gone through the free agency period, right? Now we got to go through the draft that we just encountered last week. 3 days takes for the draft. 3 great days. Got the weekend, right? Got all these rounds, rounds 1 through 7. They made some moves. They made some trades. They moved down. They got some other selections. And we got to talk about their first overall selection here of all selections. That is Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels selected number 1 pick for the Commanders, 2nd overall in the draft. But the Commanders' number 1 overall draft coming over from LSU. Looking at the selection of Jayden Daniels here, I think that it was a really great selection because Caleb Williams was definitely not going to fall to you in this draft. It was just not going to happen. But Jayden Daniels does deserve the 2nd overall pick, and I'll tell you why. He's very versatile. He can move the chains. He's a tough kid. I don't want to see this kid play this year, though, unless it's garbage time, meaningless time at the end of a game, and hopefully on the upside of a victory, and not playing from behind or being put in there because the quarterback Mariota sucks and they go to Jeff Driscoll and he's not great either. So they throw him in. I don't want to see him get thrown to the wolves just yet. I think he deserves to sit out this year, learn the system of the NFL. Mariota's good enough to at least teach him the ways of preparation and how you do this and do that within the organization of the NFL. Teach him the ways. Maybe Jeff Driscoll a little bit can help out with that as those 2 quarterbacks we talked about that were signed in the offseason. But Jayden Daniels does not need to be playing quite yet. I don't believe that would be a great selection for them. I feel like they would waste a pick if they had him playing this year and he potentially gets hurt. You don't want to mortgage your future. This is not a team that is assembled for him to go out and play right now. The Bears, however, I believe, are a different story. I think we will see Caleb Williams start this year, see that number 1 overall pick investment. I don't know if it's going to pay off, but I think Caleb Williams will start. Jayden Daniels may start at some point this year, and I could be wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I just want to see him have as much time to prepare and come in year 2 and have a year like Mahomes did. It's not going to happen quite like Mahomes. They don't have the team assembled enough for him to do that, nor do they have the type of coaching like he's got over there in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, that being Andy Reid, which I know those of you in Philadelphia miss him every single time you go out there and you get served the big fat L. And unfortunately, I don't have that clip on this show as, that show is Total Football Talk. And we are Commanders Gridiron Report. For those of you who tune into that show on Mondays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., thank you very much. Cole and I love you. You can check out that show on the Sartoba Media platforms or on Comey Media Incorporated. Now, back to this. When it comes to Jayden Daniels, I believe that was a great selection, and it's going to pay dividends at some point going forward if they manage this correctly. If they manage it correctly. Next, we'll go to Johnny Newton, round 2, pick 36, defensive tackle out of Illinois. Looking at this selection right here, they definitely need to upgrade the defensive tackle position when you look at what they lost in this past offseason. Coming from Illinois, the type of school, he had success. And, round 2, pick 36 overall selection, the 4th pick in the second round. Great selection for this team right here. And sorry, guys, I've been doing a lot of talking for like 35 minutes. Had to get some water. You know how it is out here in these streams. But looking at this right here, Johnny Newton, round 2. You got to look at some things for the future. And round 2 selections were key in this draft, in my opinion. And the next one, they had 3 picks in round 2 this year. And the other selections they made were with the 50th overall pick. Mike Sainstrill, you got to look at cornerback from Michigan, the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines. You look at him and his tenure over there. He was a great addition for that Michigan Wolverines team when he came over a few years back, playing under Coach Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh wishes that they needed that selection, that quarterback, that team had a need for it in the moment that he was taken, because I'm pretty sure he would have drafted this kid from his team. Of course, everybody wants to come over from college, and then you have a bunch of kids from your team, your national champion team, come on over, and you want to be able to select all of them, but it just doesn't quite work out. I feel like this guy right here, this cornerback from his old team, he wishes he would have been able to draft, because he's going to make some noise at some point for this team. I know you could say that I'm hyping up the defensive tackle, this previous selection, and him with Mike Sainstrill, but look here, guys. You're part of a Michigan Wolverines national champion team, okay? You let me know here in the comments if you disagree. If you disagree with this right here, if you don't think that Mike Sainstrill was a great selection with the 50th overall pick, then you got to look right here as well at the 53rd overall pick. 3 picks later, they picked up a tight end, Ben Sinnott, from KSU, from Kansas State University. Got to look at what he did over there. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I didn't have enough time to fact check that. But what I can tell you is he's a pretty big tight end, another target that they can definitely work with. And, you look at the moves that they made in free agency. We already talked about, how they had brought over, a bunch of people from other teams. And, they had released players, they had released Logan Thomas. They brought in Zach Ertz, but Zach Ertz is like a short-term plan. Like, that's why they only signed him for 1 year. He's only a 1-year option. And now you look at Ben Sinnott, he's young. He's somebody that you can work with for quite some time if he stays healthy and if he actually grows within the game of football. But if he does what he did over at KSU, I feel like this guy right here could definitely pay dividends for your team. You got to look at Brandon Coleman in round 3. Pick 67. Pick 67 right here. Coming on over from TCU. Now, TCU, that team was no slouch. The school was no slouch. This guy right here, Brandon Coleman, coming in the 3rd round, pick 67. I think an offensive lineman like of his caliber coming over that late in the draft, even though it's not too late, it's pretty much the middle of the draft. But hey, to me, I'm saying it's late in the draft for him, because I could have seen him taken in a late, I would say early to second to mid second round, early second to mid second round. Like, they could have taken him with the previous picks that they had. However, they got some other steals. Being with Sinnott, being with Sainstrill, I feel like is going to be a steal right here in the second round, in my opinion, even though nobody really likes to talk steals in second rounds, but I think that he's going to pay dividends for him. And Brandon Coleman, if those knees can stay healthy, we look at this picture right here. If these braces, they tell a story. Everybody who wears braces like that, for the most part, playing a physical contact sport like football, they've had some knee problems. He's a bigger dude, and he plays offensive line. So it's one of two things. Either he does have the history of knee injuries, or he's doing it to protect himself, knowing he's working with all this weight right here and trying to keep his body in form while he's in big-time movements out there on that field. So let's hope that's what it is. Like I said, some of these guys in the later rounds didn't get to do but so much homework on them as far as their health. But what I can tell you, coming over from a school like TCU and the success that they had, I think Brandon Coleman's definitely going to pay dividends for them at the offensive lineman position, at some point within the next 2 to 3 years, they'll see dividends paid. Maybe even as early as this year. I'm going to say by year 2, 3 at the latest. Brandon Coleman will make some noise over there in Washington. And by making noise, he won't be letting noise get to his quarterback. And that'll be Jayden Daniels at that point. And this team will have a much improved offensive line in 3 years than what we were seeing for the previous 1 to 5 to 10 to 30 years for the most part. Okay? Because even the times they made the playoffs in the past 30 years, which hasn't been many, like a handful of times, they didn't have but such a great offensive line. It was mainly their defenses that were getting them there. So that's a story for another day. But right now, looking at Brandon Coleman, great selection in the 3rd round. Our next selection, though, is probably my favorite of this draft. And it's not just because he's a McCaffrey, but we've got another wide receiver option here. And someone that I feel like can play the role of like a Wes Welker-like role from back in the day. Luke McCaffrey, if he develops well enough. I mean, he did what he did at Rice. Rice is not a big-time school like Alabama or Auburn or LSU or Ohio State or anything. But looking at what he comes from, Ed McCaffrey, even his wife was I think she was like a famous soccer player or something, or played for the national team. So his genetics, along with, Christian McCaffrey, these two, he was definitely touted to come to the league at some point. Luke had hype when he was younger of possibly being better than Christian as far as a physically gifted athlete. Now, he does fall to the 3rd round. He is the 100th pick overall. But I do have faith in this kid that he is definitely going to make some noise for this team at some point. Now, this team has had some history in the past, whether it's drafting or signing players who are free agents that come from famous fathers. And when you have famous fathers like Jerry Rice, I believe they brought in Jerry Rice's son before. Also, you got to look at Randy Moss's son. Thaddeus Moss came on over the tight end for a little bit. So Washington has a history of bringing over former Legends kids who may or may not have even played with the Commanders back in the day, as formerly known as the Redskins, but they at least give their kids a shot. So the fact that Luke was drafted, which he was going to get drafted somewhere in the 3rd or 4th round, in my opinion, and I was saying this before. I even said on Total Football Talk at some point, even though we don't really talk college football over there that much, I said when we were talking about Christian McCaffrey at one point last year, I said, look out for his brother Luke in the upcoming draft. I didn't even think at that point that we'd be talking about him coming over to Washington. I thought he'd more likely go somewhere like potentially with his brother in San Fran if they were looking to upgrade at wide receiver at some point or have an additional slot option, or, potentially other NFC teams, AFC teams too. But I just didn't see the option of him going to Washington because I didn't know what Washington was going to look like at that point. Didn't know the coach or whoever it was going to be at that point. We were talking about this option back last year. So looking at it now, I'm glad to see Luke McCaffrey get an opportunity in the league based on what he did over at Rice, but also get to see it happen in Washington. Hopefully he develops. Hopefully Cliff Kingsbury and the coaching staff take care of him to help this kid develop, and we can see some special things out of him in the next few years. Now, looking on to another selection that was made that helped out the defensive side. Coming over from Temple, round 5, pick 139, Jordan McGee. Jordan McGee here. The NFL draft slips to the 5th round. Coming over from Temple, not a huge school. Not a huge school to get excited about. He did make some noise over there while he was with Temple. However, the reason why he slipped to the 5th round more so because he didn't really play for a big primetime school. And unfortunately, at times, that does hurt you when it comes to your draft stock, which is why, even though Coach Prime moved to Colorado, from Jackson State, he knew that for his sons, they were going to get an opportunity to play in the NFL for one, but not only that, to get drafted and to get drafted at a decent spot in decent rounds and potentially in the first, preferably in the first, potentially there, or within the middle part of the draft at latest. They're going to have to move to Colorado to a team they can get a little bit more exposure to. And with Jordan McGee, Temple, you don't get as much exposure as you would at a place like Colorado. Had he played for, Coach Prime over the past couple of years, something like that, guarantee this guy would have moved up to the third round because his talent is definitely it's not bad when you watch him on tape. I just think that where he played hurt his draft stock, but I think he's going to make some noise in the next couple of years. Hopefully it'll be with this team, but it could potentially be that, it doesn't work out with Washington. He gets cut and goes somewhere else and makes noise. I see that potentially happen with Jordan McGee at some point in the future if it doesn't work out here, because I think that he's got the skills to play in the league. Now, right here, Dominique Hampton, round 5, pick 161, coming on over from Washington, the Washington Huskies. You look at what Michael Penix did and Rome Odunze did for that offense over there for the Washington Huskies. But this guy held his fort down over on the defensive side for the quarterback position. Not quarterback, but cornerback. And looking what he did over there, I think that a round 5 selection was warranted. He wasn't really like a key piece to what they did over there on the defensive side. So the fact that he was drafted, I would have to say, is based on the Washington Huskies' success over the past 2 years. And I can see him potentially maybe not working out with this team. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that all of these picks work out. But based on what I've seen on tape, I think that they could potentially, have other pieces around them that would be better for them at the cornerback position. And I think that this selection in the 5th round was for a reason. So now moving to our last pick in the draft, and that was in round 7, pick 222. Javonte Jean-Baptiste coming on over from Notre Dame, defensive lineman. Another additional piece of this team needed to make an upgraded spot for this team. And I think that it was definitely a good selection. Now, we've seen very rare at times when it comes to 5th and 6th round picks making impacts as much as 7th round picks. 7 round picks for some reason. You look at Thomas Edward Patrick Brady II. You look at Brock Purdy, who is Mr. Irrelevant. Now you look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Could he be the next one that falls in the footsteps of 7th round draft picks who make noise out here on these fields? We'll have to see. We will have to see. He's the last selection for them in this draft in round 7. Between him, you got Dominique Hampton right here. You got Jordan McGee right there. You got Luke McCaffrey with the 100th pick, who is my favorite one outside of Jayden Daniels. Brandon Coleman. You got Ben Sinnott. You got Mike Sainstra, who I believe still is going to be a steal in this draft. Even though he came from the 2nd round, I feel like it's a steal at cornerback. That's why I'm not as hype on this guy right here. Not this guy, but this guy, being Dominique Hampton coming over from Washington. I am more sold on this guy, Mike Sainstra, coming over from the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines. And then again, you look at Johnny Newton coming on over from Illinois, and Jayden Daniels. That rounds out your selections in the NFL draft. So we've talked about the pickups as far as the signings in free agency. We've talked about the releases. And we talked about the Sam Howell trade. Kyle Nash, if you're watching, okay. Just throwing a little bit of love right there, even though I'm throwing a little bit of shade, and we'll get to that next Monday night. But yes, covered that, and we covered the selections in the NFL draft. So draft, releases, and pickups we've picked up during free agency. We are all caught up on that. Now, with all that being said, we have to take it into our next part of this show, and that is where we go to our first commercial break. When we come back, we have the showstopper and much more to cover on this April one-off edition of the Commanders Gridiron Report.
Commanders, where's my soldiers? Right side, right side. Commanders, where's my soldiers? Left side, left side.
Hey, Eagles fan. Join my man Cool McCain and a host of others as they break down every single game, every single week in an objective manner, and also from a fan's perspective as well. Remember, this cast feels just like you. Nobody likes you. And you don't care. Fly, Eagles, fly. Eagles Elite Podcast. Every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. on YouTube and other podcast outlets.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, look. Hey, stop playing games. Y'all already know. Go ahead and toss him some Willie Bucks. Ain't nobody playing around. Hey, $ DWillie87. Go ahead and hit him up on the Cash App and go ahead and give him some Willie Bucks. Look at Drew looking stoic, ladies and gentlemen. Stoic on that $10 bill. So go ahead, slide my man over some Willie Bucks, and we good. That's all I'm saying. We good. Slide some Willie Bucks.
Sertoba Media, where the struggle is real to be awesome.
Drew Willingham.
In this case, yeah, you put the blame on Kyle Shanahan for apparently not preparing the team enough for the overtime rules, supposedly.
Cole Johnson.
Peyton was considered a winner, and he was the darling of all darlings for Gerald.
With a special appearance by Tyrone Alizé McDummy.
Ain't nobody calling me. Text delete.
Join these two football enthusiasts as they give you Total Football Talk. Live every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central on the Sertoba Media and the Comey Media YouTube channels.
Commanders, where my soldiers? Right side. Commanders, where my soldiers? Left side.
Welcome back to the Commanders Gridiron Report, episode 21. We are back from our first commercial break and got some things to discuss with you when it comes to, some other moves that were made within this team this offseason. But looks like we got a question here in the comments I definitely want to acknowledge, and I guess we'll take it back to the Burgundy Flex review for a second for that. It looks like this statement right here. What grade do you give the Commanders for the draft and free agency? Well, it's a good question there, Ike. And looking at this, it's kind of tough, but when it comes to their free agency, you got to look at Armstrong as a proven perfect fit with the new Commanders head coach, Dan Quinn, who immediately helped him take his game to new heights upon arriving in Dallas 3 years ago. Washington could still land to make another move at the edge rusher position at some point, with Armstrong more a rotational piece than a top guy, but linebacker Frankie Louvu also adds another pass rush element. Eckler, the running back position, brings the pass-catching element to Washington, which lost Antonio Gibson in free agency to the New England Patriots. Eckler's pairing with Brian Robinson is perfect complement of skills in the backfield. So looking at all of that, you got to say between the running back position and on the defensive side with Dorrance Armstrong, got to really like those pickups right there. I'll get to the grade in a minute. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a backstory. The Washington Commanders joined the New England Patriots as a team picking in the top 3 of the draft this year. And looking at what they did, you got to give them credit for the way that they drafted as well. And we're going to talk about that more in a second, is to answer your second part of your question. But to give them a grade, and I'm not trying to be biased, guys. I'm really not trying to be biased at all. But when it comes to the free agent moves that we just talked about in this segment and covered, you can go back and listen to it and check it out. When you go back and you see it, I'd have to give them an A for their free agency grade based on all the moves they made. When it comes to their draft, their best pick in the draft was their first one, and that's quarterback Jayden Daniels. I think he will be the best quarterback from this draft. And I'm not just saying that just because we're talking about the Commanders here. I just think that Caleb Williams is working with Eberflus and company over there in Chicago. They don't have the best pieces around them to develop that quarterback like Kingsbury potentially can. And even though it didn't work out with Kyler Murray, I feel like it can work out over here in Washington. I think he learned the error of his ways, and that being Cliff Kingsbury and coaching. When you look at that, the worst pick, I think, I didn't love the pick in the third round of when it came to some of the selections that they had made. And in the third round, you got to look at this team and what they did. And they picked up Luke McCaffrey, right? That's the pick that I really like. But out of the other picks that you have here, pick 67, Brandon Coleman, I threw a bunch of hype on. But if I really had to pick between the two of a pick that I wasn't really that excited about, based on the other moves they made in free agency and in the draft, I'd say that it would have to be this guy, and that being Brandon Coleman. If I were to say that the worst pick, even though I threw some good zingers out there for Brandon Coleman when I was just talking about him a few minutes ago, if I were to say anywhere in the draft, the worst pick was there, and that's not bad considering the rest of the pieces they brought around him. So pretty much in short, in his first year of running the draft, general manager Adam Peters absolutely killed it, in my opinion. And it started by taking Daniels with the second overall pick, but continued throughout the success. This is a team moving in the right direction. I liked all their second-round picks in defensive tackle Johnny Newton, and I love the steal in Mike Sandstill, and I'm going to say it now. The Sandstill, or however you say his name, I still like him based on the footage I saw from him over in college, coming from the defending national champion, Michigan Wolverines. And especially tight end Ben Sinnott. I love those upgrades because, again, Zach Ertz is a short-term answer. So they drafted a lot of talented football players. With that being said, even though I gave their free agency an A, I'm going to give their draft an A+. So your draft gets an A+, and your free agency gets an A. That's who I have for my grades there, Ike. So thank you for the question. You guys want to keep bringing the questions on in, I'll be happy to answer them. But until then, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next segment here. That segment is the Total Showstopper.
High off the way that this sound, they turn up as soon as they feet the ground. I am not playing around. I hit them, I bet that they feeling me now.
We talked a little bit about Jayden Daniels here in the last segment of this show, here the Burgundy Flex Review, as part of the free agent moves and part of the moves that were made within the trades, with Sam Howell and then the draft. They moved around quarterbacks. Well, they moved a quarterback, and they brought in 3 between the 2 in free agency and the 1 in the draft. But Jayden Daniels, will he live up to the hype? I would have to say he will. And again, because of the question I just answered from Ike, I pretty much, answered Ike's question and gave the answer to this already. I feel like he will live up to the hype, but I don't feel like it's going to be necessary for him to live up to that hype this year. I feel like he needs to take his time, develop, take this year, similar to what Patrick Mahomes did in Kansas City, learn behind Mariota, potentially whatever Driscoll can help him out with too, because Driscoll doesn't have as much experience as Mariota. Hopefully he doesn't learn the error of the ways of Mariota. Still plays within the style of what Jayden Daniels can do, but, learn the professionalism side from Mariota. Because Mariota is not bad when it comes to on paper, when it comes to how to be a quarterback. But his production on the field is a different story. Classroom quarterback is different than field quarterback. Classroom quarterback Mariota did great with Wonderlic, I think, if I remember right. When it comes to his preparation, he's spot on. He knows what he's supposed to do. However, does he always physically do what he's supposed to do with what he knows what he's supposed to do? Not always the case, which is why he's bounced from the Titans to the Falcons to the Eagles and now to the Commanders. So we'll see what happens this year when it comes to that. But I alluded to it earlier, and I'll say it again. I really think that Mariota needs to start this year, and you have Jayden Daniels sit it down. And I cannot beat it into the ground enough. And it's just so I can probably make some clips into some shorts for YouTube or TikTok at some point later with the way I'm saying the stuff now. But what I will say is that this team did very, very well with free agent moves and the draft this year. The best free agency and draft moves I've seen of this millennium for this team. We'll say for this millennium, because this team has had horrible leadership throughout the entirety of the Dan Snyder tenure from 99 to earlier this year when the sale was final. Looking at what we saw in that tenure, we didn't get this type of draft before. We got lucky to have Joe Gibbs for a few years, with 4 years back in the mid-2000s from 04 to 07. But even then, he did the best he could but, his style of football was, not the same as it was the same as what it was when he had success before, with some alterations, but the type of game that he coached was not up to speed with what the NFL was at that point, which was why he ended up retiring a second time from the game of football as a head coach. It's the only success this team has had in that time frame. Since that time with Joe Gibbs, this team has definitely experienced huge tales of woes, except for when Mike Shanahan and company drafted RG3, and they had that one great season and some decent years with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, but the rest of the team around him wasn't good enough to be successful. This year was the best draft of this millennium for the Washington Commanders franchise, formerly known as the Redskins, the football team, Washington team of football, so you can call them hashtag WTF. This is the best draft this team has had, okay, in this millennium. Now, you could argue what they did in the previous time, in the previous 1900s, in the 20th century. You can argue it, okay? But what I will say is this. Right here, right now, this team is definitely something special to watch in the next few years. And Jayden Daniels, with the number 2 overall pick, will he live up to the hype? Yes, he will. I just don't want him to get thrown to the wolves too soon. Everybody thinks he's ready right now. Certain critics do, certain don't. I'm going to be the one that sits here on this platform and tells you that I really, truly, strongly believe that he needs to sit this year out for the most part. Maybe play some garbage time at the end of the season or at the end of some games that hopefully Mariota can lead to victory, and hopefully this offense can put up some decent amount of points and get a good amount of protection from the offensive line on the pass block and the run block situations that we have not had the greatest of opportunities over the past few years with the previous leadership. Ron Rivera, a mainly defensive-minded guy, and Dan Quinn, very similar in that aspect in how he ran the team in Atlanta. But now he's apparently sold the Commanders that he has changed the era of his ways, because as you saw in how they plummeted in that Super Bowl that he led them to as the head coach years back, in the Matt Ryan debacle, we won't even get into all that. I'm not going to throw shade on this guy. I'm trying to give him a clean slate. But you have to look at this. Dan Quinn and Ron Rivera, very similar as far as defensive-minded coaches. Hopefully, this case with Cliff Kingsbury, they do not screw the pooch. And I'm saying this as nice as I can because of what happened in Arizona and then how he had to go back to college. And I'm not going to do all that. But what I am going to say right here, right now, is Jayden Daniels and these picks in this draft, along with the free agency. I cannot beat it into the ground enough, you guys, that they had one of the best drafts I've seen from this team in history of the franchise. Best of the millennium. I'm not saying best of the previous century in the 20th century, but again, I'm saying it right here, right now. In the 21st century, it is the best draft they have had. Thank you to those of you who are just now tuning in on Sartoba Media, as well as on Twitter, Team MBS Media, and A7BN Sports on Facebook and YouTube as well. And to those of you watching on Twitch, we got a decent amount of participation right now in the streams as far as viewership. Hit me up with some questions, some comments, and I will acknowledge them like I did Ike's right here when I just, answered that question a few moments ago. Now, again, getting back to Jayden Daniels. Earlier we recapped the entirety of the draft, free agency period, the notable signings, notable releases, and where we're at right now, and with the number 2 overall pick. And I do believe Jayden Daniels will live up to the hype. I've said it time in and time out through this previous hour up to this topic right here. A solid choice at quarterback, the best selection for them of this draft. And it could potentially go down as the best selection for Adam Peters in his now opportunity to be a GM for a team on his own. He now gets the opportunity to be a GM by himself, okay? He gets not a co-GM, not an assistant, not an apprentice like he was with the Patriots, and then moving on to the 49ers, spending the time that he did there, moving up the chain. You know, he does have Super Bowl rings in the front office, but not as a GM, not as the guy making selections. However, you can see that this man learned his preparation and how he works within the draft from John Lynch, from the hoodie Bill Belichick in the past, that he learned how to work within the draft, and he did a great job this year. Again, A+ in the draft and an A in free agency is what I'm going to go with for the grades there, Ike. And again, I can't thank you enough for that question earlier, and glad that we were able to
Acknowledge me.
for you on the show. But with the number 2 overall pick, guys, let me know what you think here in the comments. Do some of you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm delusional with how I'm going about this with Jayden Daniels? Let me know here in the comments what you're thinking out here in these streams. But when it comes to that, we're going to continue our live broadcast on to our final commercial break. And when we come back, we will go to the final drive.
Commanders, where my soldiers, right side, right side. Commanders, where my soldiers, left side, left side.
Everything Boston. I love you morons. New Kids on the Block, New Edition.
Dear whatever the law firm is. Sincerely, the U.S. Supreme Court.
Ben Affleck, Matt Damon. Go yourself again, Jason.
In a world where chronicles of the past are brought to the streams, whether the content is relatable or completely beyond your realm of life, there is no shadow of a doubt that this show is absolutely full of shenanigans. Get ready for
D. Willie in the evening,
this Sunday at 10:05 p.m. Eastern.
exclusively on Sertoba Media, where the struggle is real to be awesome. Whether it's news, the largest egg producer finds bird flu in chickens at a Texas plant, weather, devastating tornadoes rip through the heart of the United States, inspiration, a breast cancer survivor completed the journey of chemotherapy, and now begins a future one of matrimony, or sports. Michael Jordan is shown on a photo with Diddy. LeBron James has a video extolling the virtues of a Diddy party. This has been yet another beating a dead horse presentation. We got you covered. BS3 Network proudly presents The Morning Shift with Cole Johnson, live every weekday morning beginning April 29th at 8 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Central. Oh, yes. The tradition, the pageantry, the spectacle, the history, the slut. Wait. I gotta rep my brother's stuff right. All my DMV soldiers, stand up! And welcome to the Commanders Gridiron Report. You want your Commanders to be repped right? Well, D. Willie is your man. Commanders Gridiron Report. Every Tuesday at 11:05 a.m. Eastern, 10:05 a.m. Central on the Sertoba Media YouTube channel. Music by J.KUL.
Where my soldiers, right side. Commanders, where my soldiers, left side. Commanders, where my soldiers, right side. Commanders, where my soldiers, left side.
Welcome back to Commanders Gridiron Report, episode 21. We are back for our April one-off edition. Just getting back from our commercial break. We'll go ahead and take it to the final drive. Discuss our closing thoughts on what we've seen in the past 6 weeks here for the Commanders and their team.
We bet on ourselves, so what you expect? A diehard fan of a never regret. Yes, sir.
And here at the final drive, closing thoughts on the Commanders ahead of OTAs and mandatory minicamp. It's going to be nice to see when the rookies come in, when Jayden Daniels comes in, we get a little bit of footage of him, slinging the rock out there on the practice field. It's going to be nice to see him getting inaugurated with his team right there. And I would say that the other pieces that we discussed in the previous segments, between the offense, between the defense, even on special teams, with the returning with Jamison Crowder, if he can still do what he's done and still extend the, yards on the field when he's returning punts or even kickoff returns, if he can still be a fraction of Jamison Crowder and still help develop the younger guys to where there's a succession plan over there for punt returners and kick returners on special teams, I think that's definitely going to be a key leadership piece that they had in free agency that they re-signed. Out of the 4 re-signings, they only re-signed 4 players out of all the players they lost on March 1st. Jamison Crowder, I believe, is going to pay dividends with helping usher in the successor for whoever's going to take over as the starting punt returner or starting kick returner for the team. And that's big because everybody focuses more on offense and defense a lot of the time. But as you've heard me talk about in Total Football Talk when breaking down the other 31 teams in the NFL, as well as the UFL that we currently have, which we've gone through 5 weeks of the UFL now. We cover that every single week. So if you've missed it, you can go back. If you're watching on Sotoba Media, you can go back and watch previous 5 weeks of Total Football Talk and get caught up on UFL action, at least from our point of view, if you'd like to. But when it comes to that, you've seen me talk about special teams. I cannot beat it in the head enough that you have to be successful on all 3 phases of the game in order to be a champion. Like you can't just be mediocre. When you have to get to the dance, right? You have to get to the playoffs. But then that's the moment where you have to have the players on your roster that can flip a switch like that and be able to take you to that level that you need to be at when it comes to representation of the position for your team to get the development, not the development, but the production that you need in order to get over the hump. So looking at this and looking at everything as a whole, when it comes to, their free agent moves and the trade of Sam Howell, what they got in return for that, and then their draft picks. You can call me a homer all you want to, even though he's like you see on the license plate behind me, been a fan of the team since back then, and now I have the pleasure of covering it, and I'm not giving you a biased opinion. You saw on a lot of episodes, almost every single episode until now, like I have been laying it in thick and thin with this team when they needed to get their rear end chapped. Okay, I have not held back. I'm not saying that they're going to go and have a huge turnaround this year and be, 12-5 and win the division or anything. I'm not saying anything ludicrous like that. What I am saying is they have a lot better chance of being than 4-13 or 3-14 or going backwards or anything like that. They're not going to go backwards with the moves they made this offseason. And they sure as hell aren't going to be 4-13. They are going to probably, more than likely, have a losing record, in my opinion, this year. I think they can potentially go 7-10 or 8-9. Okay. I think that they can potentially be their ceiling this year as far as cap and wins. I'm going to be fair with that because last year, and it's similar to what I said last year, but I was giving them the benefit of the doubt. This year, I'm being realistic, but I hope that I'm wrong and they're better. At the same time, I want them to take a licking a little bit this first year and see what other pieces they need to replace going into next year. And then with the addition of these moves that they made in free agency, the draft this year, and free agency in the draft next year, if they play their cards right, then by year 2, when Jayden Daniels takes over as the starting quarterback, if you sat him this year and protect him so he doesn't get hurt, that this team could be something special to watch by year 2 to year 3, and the Dan Quinn leadership at head coach / Adam Peters at general manager / new ownership, that everybody who's a fan of the Commanders can sit back and actually enjoy watching the game for the first time in a while. Because even the games when we know the games when you're watching in there by halftime, you already know they're going to lose. Okay. You already just have the feeling that this is not going to come back. I'm talking about the games where they actually win, because even the games that they win, it's like it's like dealing with a heart attack. As somebody who's had my own health issues in the past can tell you, it's not a fun experience. And I'm glad I wasn't watching a Commanders game or Washington franchise game, whatever you want to call them at the time, when it happened, because I might not be here to talk about it if this happened during that type of situation. Because when the team is on the verge of winning the game, they give it away, or they're right there and right there and right there and barely break through and get the win. Okay. It is nerve-wracking to watch. You know, I'm not saying we need to be like the Patriots of the 2000s and mid 2010s and have games to where you cut it on and we know from jump that you're going to win every single game, it feels like, when you watch the game. You don't need to be that. You don't need to be hogging the spotlight that much. But what I will say is they definitely will improve. And the places, the aces they've got in places for this team now are going to pay dividends beginning in 2025 to 2026 at the latest. Okay. And the players that I've mentioned as the notable players from the draft and such, mainly Jayden Daniels, are going to showcase that. And they are going to do a great job for this team. That's what I feel like as we get to where we're rounding out the show now, because, you know, spent a good amount of time talking about the free agent moves, the draft picks, you know, what we saw and what I saw in the moves and how I feel that they did within that. It makes me feel great seeing what they did within the free agency period and the draft. A lot better than if you're a representation of the Dallas Cowboys, whether you're a fan of them or if you're a hater, you love it. But the other teams in the NFL, Eagles had a solid draft and solid moves in free agency with Saquon Barkley and re-signing their top 2 wide receivers, their 1A and 1B, and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. The New York Giants made some moves. You know, we can go into the argument all day that the Falcons screwed up with the 8th pick in the draft, but we already covered that yesterday on Total Football Talk. You have to go back and check that out. But as far as the Commanders go, I'm not getting my hopes up here. I'm not going to literally sit here and say they're going to be hot out the gate. You'd love to see success, but the key with this team, and especially for the fans at this point, they're excited for the change, excited with the new ownership, excited with the new head coach and all that stuff. You know, at first I was throwing shade on it. I was not excited about Dan Quinn coming to the Commanders, okay? As I've had a couple months to digest it, I'm coming around on it. I think with Cliff Kingsbury getting a second chance in the NFL as and having it as an offensive coordinator is going to be huge for him. Okay. And I think he's going to take the opportunity to run with it and eventually get another head coaching job at some point, because he is young enough to come back from what he's coming back from. Like he definitely just fell out, you know, at the end of his Arizona Cardinals time as the head coach, and just didn't leave with a good taste in everybody's mouth in the NFL. So this is like his reintroduction to the NFL, this time offensive coordinator side, and we'll see if he can do what he needs to do. I think he will. I think they made a great pairing here with Adam Peters, running the depth chart, running who is going to be on it. You know, I wouldn't say running the depth chart, running the roster and who's on the 53-man roster, right? Like who he signs. And of course, the head coach is the one who helps determine who stays on that 53-man roster, and then who plays, and then where on the depth chart they are, and so forth. But of course, all the communication goes back and forth between the GM and the head coach and other members of the coaching staff to find out where players are in development, certain ways to where they need to decide certain snaps that certain players get, certain plays that they get, if they get more or less based on their production, like throughout a week in practice. Health and all that plays a factor of it too. So just because you see your guy playing less doesn't mean that it's because he's playing bad. It could be just because he's got an injury. So there's a lot of factors that go into those decisions. Not saying that Ron Rivera was the worst that we've had, because Jay Gruden, I feel like in the past, in the tenure of this team under Dan Snyder, you could argue with Spurrier, but even Spurrier was starting to have the team on a turnaround a little bit. Schottenheimer went 8-8 for 1 year. Norv Turner was basically you inherited him from the previous ownership, and even he wasn't horrible. He could have been better, but he wasn't horrible. I would have to say Jay Gruden was the worst coach throughout the tenure of this team, if not Jim Zorn. Jim Zorn, you could argue, could be that too, but Jay Gruden had more time as the head coach than Jim Zorn, and I feel like if you were going to say worst coach of the tenure, you have to give it to Jay Gruden. So I feel like if you give this team a chance, a lot of these guys that are on the coaching staff, players that are re-signed, or not re-signed, but signed from other teams from free agency, a lot of these guys have chips on their shoulders because where they were previously didn't necessarily work out, right? So they want to turn it around. They want to leave their mark on the game and do their best to uplift a franchise and go into an opportunity that a franchise that's historic in value, that's 92 years old now. 92 years old is, as far as the franchise goes, they want to bring back some of that historic greatness to this team, even though they haven't completely figured out the name, because in the next year or two, the name of the team could change. The name of the show could change. A lot could change in the next 2 to 3 years. But, this team was kind of thrown together as far as the name goes under the Dan Snyder tenureship to kind of appease everybody. I feel like at some point this ownership is going to change it. Will they change it back to the formerly known as the Redskins? And I'll say it, the Redskins, because I do have Cherokee lineage, and even, forefathers and others aren't upset with the name. It's something I'm not going to get into right now. It's all politics. People want to call it the slur, all they want to. But those of you who have the genes and have the heritage and all that to prove it and support it, you can jump with me and stand behind me, stand here right now and say you are not upset with the old name, whether you were a fan of the team or not. If you're a fan, more than likely you're still a fan of the team because they still carry the historic value. But how are we going to get back to fully representing what that team used to be? And not just the name, but, the greatness from the years in like the 80s and the great team in 91 and the Sammy Ball days when they won, 2 NFL championships back then before the Super Bowl. This team has 5 total Super Bowls, not five total championships, 3 Super Bowls, 2 NFL championships, 5 total championships in the game of the NFL in the 92 years they've been here now, right? You got to celebrate that somehow. You got to celebrate that with a better name than Commanders. Even though this show has got some cool graphics, a great intro, a great outro, I don't mind editing that stuff and changing the name if they change it to something better. Now, that question is for you to answer. Those of you out there watching this live or post-production, if you're watching this syndicated or whatnot after this goes live here and once we end it here shortly. But that's a question for you. What do you want to see the name of this team as? Definitely don't want to see it as the Commanders. And I'll go on paper as saying it. Even though my man J.KUL made one great intro song for this, it's a song that he made. It's not just for this show, but he had it out and I heard it and I was like, man, I like this song. Reached out to him, and that's why it is our intro and outro for this song, for this show. Now, looking at all that, I'm pretty sure as much of a fan of the team as he is, once they change the name, he'll come up with a new song. I'm sure, I'll talk with him and make sure it's cool. It's cool to run this one, so I'm cool. It'll be cool to run the new one. We'll have some new graphics. I don't mind putting in the hours to update this show on the streams, update the name, the lineage will still stay. All this will still be a part of it. even Hail to the Red Zone, when they were formerly known as the Redskins back in 2019 and 2020, I had Hail to the Red Zone was what the name of the show was, and had like 4 or 5 episodes of it, and that was right at the end of that season in 2019. 2020, I think it was an episode similar to like what we're doing right now. Yeah, it was, where we were recapping free agents moves and trades up to like this point in like April and got to May. And then with the pandemic, everything that went wild, all the politics, trying with the media to turn people against each other, color versus color, and all this stuff. I hated all that stuff. Like, and all my friends out here, like we were talking about it. I was glad that I didn't lose any, and we were able to stick together. As now on the other side of it all that stuff, it for the most part is blown over, but we're still stuck with this whole name situation where when all that was going on and, everybody was crying out against stuff. And then we had the thing with the name, went to the Washington football team, and now we're back to the Commanders for the past couple of years. So looking at it, again, the ownership inherited a problem. They inherited baggage that had to be cleaned up. It was like somebody defecated all over every single inch of property that within this organization. The training facilities, the offices, the field, the suites, the chair, the everything, like even your food, defecated all over everything is what it was like when Snyder had turned over the keys to everything associated within this team because of everything that he did during his tenure as the owner, primarily over the last 15 years of it. He got too comfortable in his position, and his true self began to show during that tenureship, and all the negative things in life, all the bad things I wouldn't say all of them because there's worse you could have done. It was bad what he did. I'm not excusing it, but could have done worse. Let's just at least acknowledge that. But, of the things that he did are still of such high nature of being bad, it's like unforgivable, and it's something that you don't want to have as a part of your leadership within your organization, especially if you're one of 32 teams, one of 32 fortunate teams to represent the brand and the shield known as the NFL. So making those changes within ownership, again, even though Snyder seemed that he defecated all over everything, now within a year of you having time to clean it up, because it actually hasn't been a full year since it all took place in the sale. I think it was like July of last year, if I remember right. Again, I've had a lot going on. I can't remember everything as far as dates. That's why I make notes. But I believe it was July of last year when the sale took place for this team. So they've had less than a year right now going into May. May starts tomorrow. They've literally had 10 months to clean this up. So constructing a team that's actually truly competitive, I believe, was first on their list. And that's what they did this year. That's what they did this offseason, in their first true offseason as owners. This team, led by Josh Harris, Magic Johnson, brought in Adam Peters. And Adam Peters brings in Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury and the other coaches a part of this staff, and upgrades the quality of leadership for this team, completely restructures the culture within this team. And then we see the moves that are made within free agency and the draft that follow it. I, fan or not, whether just somebody just covering the team or you out there, you have to respect it. You have to 100%, because this team is a total different team than what you're used to seeing, and it's going to show this year. And hopefully, as long as everybody stays healthy and everybody does their job, and they even have role players that come in and shift in at times to ease the burden on the starters, to have everybody truly forming as a team, I think this team's going to do some things. Maybe not a Super Bowl run anytime soon. Will be sweet to see in the next 5 to 6 years. But I think we'll be getting ahead of ourselves if we got to that type of expectation, right? So with all that being said, I have high hopes for the future. Hopefully you do too, if you're a Commanders fan watching this show. Thank you all for tuning in and watching this show on today's very special edition of the April one-off edition of this show. It definitely means a lot to me to have support out here in these streams, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the platforms. The help between A7BN Sports, the help between Team MBS Media, and as well as to those of you watching via Sartoba Media. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your day, whether you are watching this live or syndicated in the process of watching this show. We've gone for an hour and a half now to make up for time, hopefully, for not being here over the past month and a half or so. Had to recap free agency and the draft moves. Maybe back at some point in May in the next 30 days to have a one-off episode for this Commanders team in that month, but it depends on what happens over the course of the next few weeks for May. Not a lot of news comes about. I'm not going to really have a reason to have a show. If for me, I can find a reason to have at least a 30-minute show to make it worth my time to get up here and give you an episode of Commanders Gridiron Report, I'll be back in May. But it has to be to where I can at least give you a 30-minute episode. If not, it's not worth my time. But today, we went to an hour and a half because we had to cover from March 1st until the draft last week. So that's like 7 weeks of Commanders coverage I had to frame down for you. And even though it's mainly done within an hour-long show, I think going over 30 minutes is pretty good for missing, 6 weeks or so, or 7 weeks almost of not having the show on the air. So thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate you taking your time for watching this show, the Commanders Gridiron Report, via A7BN Sports Facebook, Team MBS Media on YouTube, and on Sartoba Media via LinkedIn, X, Twitch, and YouTube. And I've only got one more thing left to tell you, and that is, as always, please stay safe out here in these streets.
Who do we rep? Commanders. Where my soldiers? Right side. Commanders. Where my soldiers? Left side. Commanders. Where my soldiers? Watch the middle. Commanders. Where my soldiers? Now we step. Where my soldiers? Right side. Commanders. We rep. Where my soldiers? Left side. Now we step. Where my soldiers? Watch the middle. Command we red, where my soldiers hit him.
Sartoba Media, where the struggle is real to be awesome.
You ain't got to go home, but you got to get on up out of here. Episode 21 of the Commanders Gridiron Report has come to a close. Thank you, as always, to those of you taking your time to tune in. We'll see you back very soon for episode 22. Take care and stay safe out here in these streets.